discussing this since 2004.
Oh, wow.
And UMS was included in the discussion not too long after that.
Okay.
So the great composer William Bolcom, who was on our faculty, he brought me 3 scores. They were huge. They stood off the floor about 3.5 feet or 4 feet high, and they were a couple inches thick, and there were 3 of them. And I thought they were the 3 pieces of the trilogy, because he told me there is a trilogy. Here's 3 scores. But when I finally had a chance to look at them, it turned out to be only the 3rd opera, and then I realized this is a big project.
I did suggest it. I felt for years that it's time that it was done, given a proper, complete recording and a complete performance.
The 3 operas are Milhaud's settings of Claudel's version of Aeschylus's trilogy. It starts off with the death of Agamemnon, the king, as he comes back from Troy. He's killed by his wife Clytemnestra. And that is really the story of the first opera. We focus on another murder. That is the murder that Orestes, Agamemnon's son, and Electra, his daughter, are planning for Clytemnestra, their mother, to avenge their father. In the 3rd opera, Orestes is being hunted down by Eumenides, by Furies. So Clytemnestra has sent them also to avenge her death. He is protected by the god Apollo, and they go to Athena to have her judge what should happen to Orestes. She sets up a trial. This is essentially the beginning of Athenian democracy and justice. It's decided that he was not completely in the wrong and he's acquitted.
They didn't like the word opera because they thought of opera singers standing, singing, being overly dramatic or detached. They really wanted it to be theatrical and communicate something really visceral and something that everybody in the audience would feel.
Who's conducting it thinks it's kind of like an opera. In a way, it is an opera. It has been staged, but it is somewhere between oratorio and opera and so on. I don't know. It's the same kind of unclassifiable, I suppose, as my Songs of Innocence.
By the way, Bill Bolcom brought the piece to me because he studied with Milhaud, and there was a lesson at Milhaud's place in Paris where several composers, his students, were invited, and they became familiar with the piece, and it really inspired William Bolcom to finish his Songs of Innocence and Experience. We're here in this extraordinary institution where we can put something like this together with the number of choral singers that we need, the quality of choral singing, the resource, the size of the hall, the resources of a wonderful orchestra, the percussion ensemble that contributes to this, because there are several movements and sections of the piece for 15 percussionists and speaker and speaking chorus. So you can't do this piece in many places.
Usually UMS is a presenter, so we are presenting performances and artists and concerts or productions that have been mounted and realized and produced somewhere else, and they're ready to tour. We're not usually working from the ground up with, building the stage and sets, building the ensembles, training the ensembles, rehearsing the ensembles. Usually for a UMS production, that all happens. They come to Ann Arbor, they do the show, and they leave. Of course, when it comes to the music and the actual scores, the fact that nobody's really performed this piece in full before has had lots of challenges between all of the ensemble directors and making sure that there's actually a consistent score that everybody's reading from and learning.
Much of it had to be restored by students who would take sections of certain parts that simply there were no parts for and had to fill in those parts. Also corrections all over the place, many misprints that had to be taken care of, and so on. So I have a suspicion that's one of the reasons why this might turn out to be a much better performance than many of the other ones, simply because we've been able to lavish the time on it. And that will make a difference in a piece of this kind.
All of the parts were not quite in line with the score all the time. We had piano vocal scores for the singers, obviously, and then we had orchestra parts that came in later. That there were severe discrepancies, and we had to continue to find these mistakes and correct them and make copies and distribute new parts. And it was a huge challenge for Paul Feeney and I to get that to happen.
Working with ensembles at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance means we've got, all of the personnel forces. We have, 300 choir members. We have a full orchestra. We have a percussion ensemble, and all of the equipment and, instruments and ensembles and all of that lives within the school. So we actually have the personnel forces to put on a project like this.
We had over 320 singers on stage between the Crow Union and the School of Music Ensemble. So to get the orchestra, which was over 120, we had a percussion ensemble of over 15 people. And to get all of those entities on stage with only being able to build out 10 feet was a real challenge. You can only build out the stage so far before the audience in the balcony and mezzanine can't see the conductor. So it's really important we keep to both what sounds good acoustically in Hill and also just the limits of what we have.
Well, I'll tell you, the biggest part of a conductor's work is before the first rehearsal. And this piece requires a great deal of preparation and many different levels. So what I would do, say, to learn a Puccini opera or a Verdi opera or a Mozart opera, I'm doing, it's a Verdi opera on crack. In the orchestra rehearsals, we have a very large orchestra. We have a lot of instruments, but not really larger than the Rite of Spring, maybe slightly larger when you count the 15 percussionists in the group. It has unusual instruments, 4 saxophones, unusual for an orchestra, 4 sax horns, which are brass instruments. We had to find those, and we're employing those, and people here, students had to learn how to play them. Otherwise, it's similar to rehearsing any huge piece, except it's a little huger.
I've been involved with this as a translator, as a soloist, as a chorus member, also as the person who prepared the French for most of the choirs. It was quite a challenge for them and for me also to prepare them. I sat in on a number of rehearsals, listening to the French that they were doing or chanting the French to them. I made a recording of all of the French for the choirs in rhythm. For the past few months, I've really listened with a critical ear to every single phrase, trying to perfect the French of a couple of hundred singers who are not used to singing in French. So I've been really involved, and I've really wanted this project to go off. And I felt a certain amount of duty to make it go off. So it did, and it was a blast. It was sometimes extremely tiring, but it was quite an experience.
Much of what falls under my watch is the contracting of the soloists and taking care of them and everything that they need to know and be doing while they're here in Ann Arbor. So that first started back in the late fall to actually start hiring the soloists, which together with Ken Kiesler and Michael Konjolka, we all worked together to identify people that we were interested in working on this project. So for me, I'm kind of the one person who should be communicating everything to the soloists while they're here in Ann Arbor. So that's required me to be pretty much at all coachings and rehearsals throughout the last week.
I guess I can't think of a time that I've done another professional gig where I'm legitimately worried about whether I know the notes going into the first rehearsals. And we get this piano vocal score that has just 4 staffs of piano. There's really no way to work through that on our own. And this week we've been discovering all week that there are lots of things that the orchestra plays that are not even in that score. So to know, coming into this, I had no clue whether I'd be able to find my starting pitches. Really, with atonal stuff, the process for me is just sitting down at the piano and playing with myself over and over again, just singing it, and then weaning myself from doing that and just seeing how well I can do a cappella. It's almost like you're trying to train yourself to have perfect pitch.
One of the most important reasons we're doing the piece, and there are many important reasons, is that the piece has never been done in North America that we know of. There's no complete recording of the 3 pieces on the market.
So we get to do something that's completely ours and that's unique to UMS, to the school, to Ann Arbor, to Michigan. So that's certainly something this piece is about.
Source of this is the play by Aeschylus, the Oresteian Tragedy or Trilogy by Aeschylus. And that is one of the most significant plays in the history of our culture and of theater. It's when jury trial replaced the idea of taking revenge on people. In order to stop the constant generations of bloodshed, we need to have another system. The family members cannot be involved. It has to be outside parties who can judge fairly who is responsible and who isn't. And that was the beginning of our jury trial system.
It is a powerful piece. It is a powerful piece, and it deserves being done. I think it has not been given the attention it deserves. I remember when I first heard recordings he played for me, and I was just bowled over. I said, this is one of the most powerful things I went into. And I really wanted to see if there were any way of ever doing it. And it would have to be a place like with the resources of the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance, because we have the forces, we have all the people.
My response was, when I first looked at it and listened to it, it's really hard to listen to. That was my first response. I figured out later after studying the score that the reason those old recordings are hard to listen to is you can't hear anything in the orchestra. You hear a massive sound in the background and a singer. The singers on those recordings, they have no idea what they're singing. They're rattling off French words. They're French. They know what the words individually mean, but they don't know the context, the story, the motivation. I think the piece is going to be tremendously exciting with the voices we have, with the orchestra playing at this level, with the choirs singing at this level, and then with the care taken to say, this line's important and those are not, because that's the biggest problem in the piece. And for the singers to know exactly what the motivation is. What are we referring to that happened to your grandfather that motivates you to be violent when you hear about it?
We did receive a visit from the fire marshal the day after the performance. He received an anonymous tip that there were more people on stage than perhaps this person thought there should be, and wanted to make sure that the stage was safe. So he came to check out this, the structure of the staging, and we jumped on it a couple times to kind of not that proves anything. Where none of us are structural engineers, but this was put in by a professional staging company, and it was just a bit of a surprise. Just, oh, hello, a fire marshal.
I think the most special moment was finishing recording on Sunday afternoon, or Sunday evening actually, because it had been stripped down to just percussion ensemble, the chamber choir, and me as a soloist. And the energy in the room when we finally got the okay from the sound engineer that, all right, we'd gotten enough takes of the final movement that we were recording, and everybody just cheering, the smile on Ken Kiesler's face of, okay, well, I guess you can go now, we're done. There was a special kind of hysteria in the air, I think.
In terms of what's going on in our society, in our world today, it has a lot to say about human motivations, jealousy, gender conflicts, gender equality, or inequality in this piece, for example, and much more. The piece is revolutionary. In fact, Harold Schoenberg was the music critic for the New York Times back in the 60s when the New York Philharmonic did the one part. He said this piece is at least as influential as The Rite of Spring and as important, and people should know it. I think it's inspiring at the end when we overcome all of this and we find a solution as human beings to the problems of violence and revenge. And we find a new justice, not the eye for an eye kind of justice. If we have the audience along with us and with the theatrical part of it, with the drama, they're going to love it.